Welcome to Love Factually, the podcast that analyzes rom-coms and romantic films using the science of close relationships. We're your hosts, Paul Eastwick and Eli Finkel. Eli, what are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about The Notebook, the 2004 romantic melodrama starring Rachel McAdams and Ryan Gosling. Some of the themes we'll explore are how family disapproval affects the course of love, whether volatile relationships can flourish, and whether love can cure dementia.
Fair warning, we'll be spoiling this movie today. So if you've always wondered what it would be like to almost lose your virginity in a haunted house, then go ahead and watch this movie and come back. Okay, Eli, who are the key characters and couples in this movie?
You were not wrong about the haunted house. I kept thinking about Pennywise the Clown the whole time. It's like, this is scary. Okay.
Could be right around the corner.
Seriously, all right. The plot revolves around the fiery love affair between Allie and Noah, who meet in 1940 at a carnival on an island off the coast of South Carolina. Allie, played in her youth by Rachel McAdams, is in town for the summer with her wealthy parents. In old age, as she begins to develop dementia, she writes down the story of her love affair with Noah in the hope that it will help her remember their relationship as her dementia gets even more severe. Noah, played in his youth by Ryan Gosling, works in a lumber yard, all working class and salt of the earth. In old age, he develops heart problems but remains lucid. He moves into Allie's retirement home and spends his days reading the notebook to her, hoping always that today will give them a few blissful minutes when her memory returns. The movie also has 4 major supporting characters. Frank, played by the Pulitzer-winning playwright Sam Shepard, is Noah's father. He is completely devoted to his son and very fond of Allie. Anne, played by Joan Allen, is Allie's mother. She believes that Noah is beneath Allie, and she schemes to ruin their relationship. We eventually learn that these objections derive from a shameful secret in her past. Lon, played by James Marsden, is precisely the sort of old-money Southern gentleman that Anne wants her daughter to marry, and she almost gets her wish. And finally, Martha, played by Jamie Allen, is a war widow that Noah dates after concluding that Allie doesn't love him anymore. She's lovely, but he's forever devoted to his one true love. So, Paul, those are the chess pieces. Are you ready to give us 1 minute on how the film moves them across the board?
I'm ready. Start the timer.
All right, on your mark, get set, go.
In 1940 in South Carolina, Allie and Noah meet at a carnival, and through begging, deception, and frantic acts of masculinity, he manages to get her on a double date at the movies with friends Finn and Sarah. They dance in the middle of the street, and that begins a fiery summer romance. Critically, Allie's wealthy parents don't think much of working-class Noah, and eventually her parents' interference causes Allie and Noah to break up as Allie is whisked away to college. Noah writes Allie every day for a year, but Allie's mother intercepts the letters, and Allie assumes that Noah has forgotten about her. Flash forward to the end of World War II, and Allie is engaged to dashing rich Lon Hammond, and Noah is rebuilding the haunted house into Allie's dream house. Allie visits Noah at the house. They discover that the letters were intercepted. They have sex. Allie is confused about what to do. Her mother shows up and says, "Let's go stalk my old boyfriend." And Allie makes the painful choice to be with Noah instead of Lon. 50 some odd years in the future, an older Noah has a notebook containing this story, which he reads to an older Allie who has some form of dementia in the hopes of restoring her memories. It works briefly, then she relapses, and then they die asleep holding hands.
Oh my goodness, you were under by about 0.7 of a second. I did not think you were going to stick that landing.
It's a lot. It's a lot to get in.
Yeah.
Okay, here's my relationship to this movie.
Tell me.
Which I am going to give to you in the form of a dramatic reading of a poem. This is not Walt Whitman, though.
Whoa.
Dramatic reading. But I am so certain you know the final half line of this poem. I'm going to pause and you're going to finish it.
Do it.
The poem goes like this. But first, my hunger pangs are sticking like duct tape.
You're right.
Let's hit up Magnolia and Mac on some cupcakes. No doubt that bakery's got all the bomb frostings. I love those cupcakes.
Like McAdams loves Gosling. That is totally what I knew. I did not even know about the movie until I had memorized. Like, this is one of the earliest sort of SNL viral sort of faux gangster rap clips, right?
It's
Andy
like
Samberg.
day one of YouTube. It's truly
exactly.
like day one.
That is totally how I know it as well.
Yeah. So Lazy Sunday by the SNL skid group Lonely Island came out in 2005, and it felt like, oh, this is a permission structure for two men to enjoy watching The Notebook and The Chronicles of Narnia.
That's
so
right.
I took that to heart.
Yeah.
And I feel like Nicholas Sparks was a thing, and I was aware of it, and I may have seen A Walk to Remember a few times personally, but yeah, this is the one that stuck. So let's talk about what this movie gets right about the nature of close relationships. What do you have?
There's a bunch of stuff here. One of the things that I found interesting is I think they handle the process of intimacy escalation pretty well. One of the scenes that I liked, I mean, they're in that, Pennywise's house, that totally dilapidated house that he's going to rebuild, and then he does, and in fact, it ends up beautiful and so forth. But he's talking about it, and they've been dating, and they're quite serious about each other, but it's still early, and he says, but I'm going to buy it one day, and I'm going to fix it up. All it needs is a new floor and new walls and a roof and plumbing and electric and furniture, but it's right on the water and there's a big old barn out there. I could turn that into my workshop. And Allie says, well, what about me? Don't I get any say in this? And it's beautiful because she just wrote herself into his future.
Into it,
And he says,
really
you
cool.
want to say in this? And she said, yes, I would. And he says, well, what do you want? And that is a moment. Now, again, it ends up complicated because the story has some obstacles to overcome. But the idea that there was a moment there where he was talking about his future and she was saying, well, don't I have a role in your future? It was a big, bold risk that she took. We talk a lot about risk regulation in the relationships world. You and I talk about it here, too, that you basically get a choice between making sure that you don't get rejected on one hand or really making yourself vulnerable with the hope that the relationship will get better. And her saying, what about me? Don't I get a say in this? Was a really big risk, or in John Gottman's terms, you might call it a bid, in which she was basically saying, look, here's my heart and I'm offering it to you. Please take it. And then he did. And that really deepened the relationship in a nice way.
I also like how they return to this idea throughout the movie about her and her painting, and that's an important part of who she is. And it sounds like she's kind of lost that when she's in the relationship with Lon. And of course, I mean, again, when did he go out and get those paints? It's not totally clear, but he's got them right there for her.
Yeah.
When she
it's not
joins him at the house later in the movie.
For a lot of this.
Yeah. Just don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it.
That's fine.
I really dug the way that the love triangle is depicted in this movie. And essentially, from the Allie's perspective, what it's like to try to get over somebody and to be with somebody new and to experience a lot of uncertainty about what to do. I think a lot of movies, even serious romantic movies, can be very ham-handed about this because they want the audience to just, root for the old flame, right? Like, often the movie has a very clear perspective. And this one does. We're obviously supposed to root for Noah. And yet at the same time, I thought it depicts the confusion pretty well.
Yes.
And we know from the close relationships literature that this can be very complicated for people. So this gets to work by Stephanie Spielman and her colleagues. Like, she's done the most work looking at how people think about current partners in tandem with ex-partners and sort of how that dynamic happens. And the bottom line is that when people feel that their current relationship isn't going all that great, they start having those old flames kick in for the ex-partner. And if the old flames are kicking in for the ex-partner, then they don't feel that great about the current relationship. So there is sort of a cyclical thing that happens there. Now, this gets to something kind of unusual about the timeline of this movie. And I didn't exactly get into this in my summary, but I think, because she says, I waited for 7 years. That is very clear.
She does. Yeah.
So But I think that means, if you just draw it up, that I think she's been in a relationship with Lon for a while.
Interesting.
And they're just getting engaged. I think it's been a few years. And it would make sense that maybe her relationship with Lon is at a bit of an ebb. I mean, I get that sense that, things are cooling between them. And that could be the time right when the feelings about the ex-partner kick in. And so I think that all of those trajectories, I think, are captured pretty well in this movie.
That last thing you said is interesting. So as best you can read the evidence, the sequencing is my feelings for the current partner are getting a little wobbly, and then I start thinking, I had this great ex, as opposed to vice versa.
So Stephanie Spielman, in some of her work, she looks at this bidirectionally, and basically it's there in both directions, although sometimes it really matters that it's like the most recent ex-partner. But it happens both ways, and I think however you want to look at this movie, it all more or less works, I think.
Yeah. Another thing I liked about the movie is it did a nice job of depicting this phenomenon in relationships world called the Michelangelo phenomenon. And in particular, it has to do with the point you raised earlier about Allie and her desire to paint. So you may recall early on, I think on their first date, Noah and Allie, he's asking her, what do you do? And she's listing all these responsibilities that she has. And he says, yeah, but what do you do for just you? What do you do for fun? And it takes her a while to answer. And then she eventually says, painting. I love to paint. And what's interesting about that is later, when she's rediscovered Noah and she's talking to Lon, the person she's engaged to be married with, and she does like him, and he's beautiful and wealthy and lovely to her, just a really, really appealing partner. And she says, just like apropos of nothing in that conversation, I don't paint anymore. I used to paint all the time. I really loved it. And he said, I didn't know that, so paint. And what I love about that is this thing that we talk about, the Michelangelo phenomenon, right? That people affect us in ways that are sometimes subtle, and we can think about the extent to which we are the person we really like most with this partner as opposed to with somebody else. And it wasn't clear exactly what it was about her involvement with Noah. Honestly, she was a painter before that too. But whatever was happening with Lon, as decent as he was, as beautiful and as wealthy and lovely as he was, that part of her had flickered out. And she cared and hadn't really noticed that it had flickered out. And now she was disappointed, and she was starting to say, wait a minute. And that was, I think, one of the big moments when she started to think, maybe I'm not with the right man.
Yeah. I think that's good. The other thing that I think this movie gets right, and you put this at the top in your intro, has to do with support from family and people's broader social circles, and just how important that is for relationship health and longevity. I mean, you might think intuitively, it's like, well, what really matters are just the relationship dynamics, right? Yeah. What's going on between you and me, and what do we bring to the table, etc. But it's real easy to miss what Bronfenbrenner would call the microsystem. What is happening in our extended family and our close friends, and importantly, that they approve of this relationship. And it turns out that it's a fairly powerful predictor of things like breakup. The great Ben Lee meta-analysis predicting dating breakup that, I keep by my bedside. I reference that paper so much. It's so good. But meaningful, strong effect size for social network support. Having the same people in your social network doesn't matter as much as feeling like they support you. But it matters a lot.
Do you ever sort of put on a nice outfit and pour a couple glasses of wine and get in bed and just start reading that out loud to see if it strikes up a mood?
Oh, sure. Bentley's meta-analysis?
Bentley's meta-analysis. Absolutely. You could just read the tables.
Like weekly.
So I also noticed this. And one of the things that I think is so interesting about the research literature on the role that like family members, friends, et cetera, play in terms of the trajectory of our relationships is the initial work got it wrong. It's one of these really cool experiences where you realize like it's important to collect data and not just once. And there was a 1972 Driscoll et al. Paper, very famous paper, that was entitled The Romeo and Juliet Effect. And the idea, the hypothesis, totally reasonable based on reactance theory, was when you're a teenager and your parents say you may not date that person, that will increase the level of attraction you have because you're going to say, I'll show you, you can't limit what I do. And I think for a long time, people in the field just thought that was correct. And now there's just been an avalanche of evidence that has shown that that study was an outlier. And overwhelmingly, research by Sue Sprecher, Diane Felmley, and a bunch of others has demonstrated that no, if you're significant others in your life, family, friends, etc., like and approve of your relationship, that bodes well. If they don't like and approve of your relationship, that bodes poorly.
I mean, this is why often when we're in a new relationship, one of the things we often try to do is bring that person around to meet our friends, and we really want our friends to like the person.
Yeah, we care.
Right? Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, right, it's basic Heider. It's basic, balance theory. It's like, you're right. I'm in love with this person, and I like my friends, and I really need my friends to approve of my romantic partner. Unbalanced triangles are very difficult to maintain.
Yeah.
Other things that this movie gets right, do you have anything else?
Well, I did have one other thing. I mean, one of my really pet topics in this space that a lot of these movies get right is this idea of a relationship microculture, that we as a pair develop our own unique understandings of things. And one of the topics that's actually been well studied in that space is this idea of couple-defining songs. People often talk about, our song. Celia Harris and others have studied this stuff, and they have their song, I'll Be Seeing You. People probably know this from Billie Holiday or Frank Sinatra or others. It's one of the famous sort of American standards. And what's interesting is, you probably noticed that it comes up repeatedly throughout the film, including, it is the very last line of the movie. She says to him, good night. They've decided to go off into the great beyond together. She says, good night. And he says, good night. I'll be seeing you. And that's the last line because that song was hugely significant in their relationship. And lots of us have these things. We have our songs or things that are uniquely or especially meaningful to us. And the more we lean into those things, the stronger on balance we are in our relationship.
Yeah, agreed. I got one more little thing. And it's just that, sex the first time with somebody, and especially the first time in your life, it's hard. It's awkward. It's not easy.
Yeah.
It's really not easy if you're in that kind of environment, trying to navigate cobwebs and creaky floorboards. But anyway, I thought that was done with some amount of grace and humor and appropriate recognition that can be kind of tricky.
Yeah, I noticed that too. I really appreciated how she was trying to be cool, calm, and collected. She could not get out of her head. She could not stop herself from talking. And look, it's a big thing to have sex for the first time. And you felt her anxiety about trying to do it the right way. And she just wasn't quite getting it right.
Yeah, I mean, if it's not clear up until this point, I think we both think that McAdams and Gosling are they're just on fire.
Oh, yeah.
In this movie.
Oh, they are.
They're absolutely killing it. All right, so what are some misconceptions about relationships in this movie?
As provident as this movie was about getting things right, it was equally provident about getting things wrong. Why don't you start hitting some here?
Okay, now I'm going to start with this one because I think it's the one that probably most people out there are thinking about. And quite frankly, this is not exactly our area of research. But let's talk about periods of lucidity with dementia.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, all right. I think so the periods of lucidity, this is a thing. Okay. It does happen. It's not very common, but you can sort of, people who have very severe dementia, okay, and by severe, it's like they probably aren't talking, they probably aren't walking, they probably aren't doing much of anything without a lot of help, that they can suddenly come back, and that often precedes death pretty closely. Okay? So, I mean, we joked earlier at the top of the podcast, can love cure dementia? But this is a thing that people have actually experienced. But I think the more incorrect thing in this movie is just the way Alzheimer's or whatever form of dementia this is depicted in general. Because usually what happens is your short-term memories go first, but you still have all the long-term memories. By the time you lose the long-term memories too, you aren't put together. You aren't walking around.
Interesting.
And she's retaining this story as he's reading it. And yet she doesn't have the long-term memories. So all of that, I mean, it's not just sort of fanciful. It's like completely backwards from the way dementia actually happens. So that's like, again, I can kind of forgive the love brings you back and then we die. I can forgive that, but like the rest of it is like, this is like way off.
Yeah,
This
especially
is
because he's reading that story over a long period of time with lots of interruptions along the way. Yeah. So, on this thing, and let me just acknowledge here that this could be classified into the category of buzzkill. But love doesn't seem to be able to do these particular miracles. And there's, as far as the science understands, this is impossible. Now, in fairness to the book, there is a line in there that says, where he says, science only goes so far and then comes God. And I think you and I need to acknowledge that in the realm of miracles, such a thing could happen, but it is above our pay grade.
Yes, this does get above our pay grade pretty quickly. So let's get back to the relationship science angle of what this movie kind of misses. So what do you have in this category?
There are a couple things that stand out in addition to what we were just talking about. Now, this one I don't think is in the category of what the film gets wrong, but I think we have it in the category of something very unusual is happening here. And in particular, there's a weird permanence to his heartbreak. And actually, this is in contrast to hers. I mean, you talked earlier about how she very much falls in love with Lon, and they have a wonderful relationship so far as we can tell. But he is not like that. And in fact, he starts dating this woman named Martha, whose husband had been killed in the war that had just happened, World War II. And she's trying to develop greater intimacy with him, and he's reluctant. And she says, what do you want, Noah? And he says,
what do you mean, what do I want?
From me. Sometimes when you talk to me, you don't even see me. Look, a woman knows when a man looks into her eyes and sees someone else.
Now, you know I want to give you all the things that you want. Right? But I can't. Because they're gone. They're broken.
I think it is plausible that somebody might have that level of love, that no amount of time can heal those wounds. And even though he has this wonderful partner, she's just sweet and kind and lovely and beautiful, seems very smart, and yet there's nothing she could possibly do to break him out of his shell. And
that one summer destroyed him forever.
Him forever. And I look, it could happen, but it is not the typical pattern. So you and I have done some work, and including people's forecasts about how heartbroken they will be by a breakup. And it turns out that most people are significantly less heartbroken than they thought they would be. And in fact, the people who are most in love when they're making their forecasts overestimate their future heartbreak the most. That doesn't mean the most. It doesn't mean heartbreak doesn't hurt. It doesn't mean people who are in love don't hurt less, but they overestimate it the most. And one of the major theories in the field, attachment theory, is pretty clear about what it thinks the normative trajectory is. There's a sequence here where first, when there's a breakup, you have protest, and we certainly see that. That's this intense sadness, anxiety, maybe vigilant denial. Second, you get despair, this like dejection and apathy, sort of can't really go about the regular activities of life. But then third, emotional detachment. There's a process where the bond starts to loosen, a new routine starts to begin, and most of us, most of the time, eventually get over a heartbreaking romance, and it is not a permanent feature of who we are forever.
And this is also Stephanie Spielman again, showing that, when people get in a new relationship, it helps them get over it.
Yeah, they're like, whoa, I guess I'm fine.
Yeah, that's the most common pattern. That's right.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about conflict, because it's very clear that this is a couple that experiences a reasonable amount of conflict.
Yeah.
Now, it's an interesting illustration. It's something that's occasionally called volatile style, volatile conflict. And this derives from some work originally by John Gottman. At least John Gottman came up with the idea that there are different styles of conflict, and volatile is one of them. But there are also sort of measures of volatile conflict that people can identify with. And I'll just read one of them here really quickly that I think captures what the movie is trying to say about the kind of conflict these folks experience. In our relationship, conflicts may be fought on a grand scale, and that is okay since our making up is even grander. We have volcanic arguments, but they are just a small part of a warm and loving relationship. Although we argue, we are still able to resolve our differences. In fact, our passion and zest for fighting actually lead to a better relationship with a lot of making up, laughing, and affection. So I think that's what this movie is going for.
Yes.
But I think it also conveys the idea that, hey, this is like pretty good.
Yeah.
And like just as good as any other way of being in a relationship.
Yeah, it seems to imply that.
Right. But the reality is actually the people who experience this kind of conflict, like conflict in general, is not good for relationships. It predicts relationship satisfaction negatively and powerfully. It predicts things like breakup. It predicts things like divorce. Now, it's also good to be able to make up and have the positive features, but it's not like the volatility and the conflict is okay. It's fine. It has no effect just because we're also positive. Like the conflict has a negative effect just as the positivity has a positive effect. And so these folks, they're not as bad as couples that are only fighting and have no positivity, but the conflict component in and of itself isn't great. And I thought the movie kind of, tried to make it seem like, it was totally fine.
What about the idea that not only is conflict inevitable, but that it offers an opportunity to learn about each other and strengthen the relationship?
So this is a great point. And that doesn't have to involve the sort of screaming and the fighting and the hitting each other, which they are doing repeatedly throughout this movie.
Yeah.
So
she in particular is hitting him.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So none of that's good. Okay. So experiencing differences of opinion, this is going to happen all the time in relationships. But boiling over in this way, generally not going to be a good thing.
Yeah, I caught a few things that are in this general space of conflict that were not. It was not totally clear to me what the movie was trying to say or how well whatever it was trying to say matches up with reality. I mean, there's the really famous part where, now they've been back together for a while, but she thinks maybe she's going to go back to Lon, and he doesn't want her to do that. And he says,
"You're born, you know it. You wouldn't be here if there wasn't something missing."
Arrogant son of a bitch!
Would you just stay with me?
Stay with you? What for? Look at us. We're already fighting.
Well, that's what we do. We fight. You tell me when I'm being an arrogant son of a bitch, and I tell you when you're being a pain in the ass. Which you are, 99% of the time. I'm not afraid to hurt your feelings. They have like a 2-second rebound rate, and you're back doing the next pain in the ass thing.
So what?
So it's not gonna be easy. It's gonna be really hard. And we're gonna have to work at this every day, but I wanna do that because I want you. I want all of you, forever, you and me, every day. Will you do something for me? Please?
And it's an interesting question whether the relationship would be just as good if he were every bit as committed to I want you and me every day.
But not talking about being a pain in the ass 99% of the time.
It's interesting because, in the John Gottman Four Horsemen sense, when he says, you're being a pain in the ass 99% of the time, that counts as criticism. That's one of the Four Horsemen.
Absolutely.
And so the movie definitely seems to say, like, no, that's just all part and parcel of a passionate love affair. And I don't know that the evidence aligns with that worldview.
I mean, that stuff lingers, right? I mean, if my partner tells me I'm being a pain in the ass 99% of the time, like maybe we get through that a moment later, as we do in that clip, which is a great clip.
It is.
But at the same time, later, that's going to come back to me. And like, that's not, you don't want that.
Yeah.
I got one other small thing here. This one, it's like, it's one of these, like, it's accurate to the 1940s, but it's actively not true today. So when they're trying to figure out what they want to do at the end of the summer, and, she's going to New York, going to Sarah Lawrence, and he's like, what am I going to do in New York? And she's like, oh, be with me. And he's kind of not having it. This is a very gendered response because certainly in the 1940s, many hometown girlfriends, you could imagine them doing exactly that and not having much of a problem with it. But I'm compelled to point out that, guess what? Today, who earns most of the bachelor's degrees? It's women. And when couples form with mismatched education levels, it is typically the case that the woman is more educated than the man.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's where we are today.
Yeah, we've never seen it before, but that is the reality now.
That's right. That is where we are now. So again, it's accurate to the 1940s. Just feel compelled to point out, not true today.
There was one thing that I found strange about the movie. It's, again, not exactly like a misperception about relationships, but the whole movie is really predicated on this idea that the two of them just have some profoundly unique connection. And I think, we talk about this sometimes on the podcast. What that means is not Noah likes all the women or Allie likes all the men. It means there's something in particular. And so there was this weird line in there that didn't make sense, right? So they meet at this carnival, and he does this dramatic gesture. I'm sure we'll talk about it in a bit. And she says right after she meets him for the first time, did you see he was standing like 2 inches away from me? And her friend says, yeah, I saw. That's Noah,
He's
though.
always like that.
Yeah, I don't get it. Like, if the whole movie is about she was incredibly special to him and, this was nothing like what he ever experiences before, why does her friend say, like, yeah, the way he treated you is the way he treats everyone? I just thought it was confused.
Getting on people. Well, let's transition to Are We Okay With This? Because this is, and it's really limited to kind of the first part of the movie as we're getting to meet him. I call this whiny masculinity. It's like, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to kill myself if you don't go on a date with me. Like again, it is, you just alluded to this. It's got this grand romantic gesture flavor, but it's actually just kind of like being a baby.
Yeah, in case people don't remember what he did, you should describe the scene.
Yeah, so right. So he keeps asking her on a date. He leaps onto the Ferris wheel to join her with this other guy in her seat. Yeah. And this is all funny. I think this is funny. We're having a good time. But then for me, at least, where I'm like, Jesus, is when he then sort of jumps onto the Ferris wheel and he's now hanging with two hands. Above a long drop, and she won't agree to go on a date with him, and then he releases one hand like he's going to throw himself off because he just can't bear to be without, this woman that he met all of minutes earlier. So this is when, masculinity turns very ugly, and I thought, the movie was kind of playing with fire here a little bit.
I had the same reaction. I mean, you and I have talked on this podcast several times about these grand romantic gestures people make and 10 things I hate about you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Heath Ledger singing, I'll take it. That's fine.
That's less upsetting. But
this is ridiculous.
This one really jumped the shark. Yes. I mean, she's saying, no, I won't go on a date with you. And so he's like, okay, well, now I'm holding on with one hand and might die. What the hell? And again, the thing for me that's really the most what the hellish about it is this is what generations of us were raised to think romance looks like. In a previous episode, I talked about it as the what you going to take no for an answer view that men are apparently supposed to adopt when they really like someone. And then if you really like them enough, you can wear them down, and then she'll eventually fall in love with you, and everyone's happy. It's just bizarre.
Yeah, absolutely bizarre. So another bizarre thing in here that this is one that bugs me all the time. And again, I don't want to step too much on the older Noah and Allie plot line. I know many people find it endearing that it is Nicholas Sparks. I'm trying to work with what the material is. I get it. Okay. But why is a love more important because it lasts for 50 years rather than, say, one? Like, why does love have to be lifelong for us to consider it a success? And again, I'm hitting our field somewhat too. For a long time, we have assumed that success means that I tracked you for the entire study until the study ended and you were still together. And it often bugs me, but it really bugs me in the context of this movie, where the together until death component is really used to provide this emotional gut punch at the end. I don't love it.
I definitely hear that. So maybe by way of mild pushback, I think there's
sure.
I think there's two ideas in what you're saying. One is, do we have to view every relationship that ends as a failure?
Yeah.
Right? There are many relationships that are good and they run their course, and we should say thank you and be grateful for them, and we should look back on them fondly, and other people should look at them, the relationship, as a success. That seems very compelling to me. I do think there is something special about a romance that persists over time, which I guess means longer rather than shorter, and until death do us part. There's something special. I'm not saying that's the only way to live a good life, but I don't think I have your ambivalence about a culture that says that is a very romantic thing. I have ambivalence about a culture that says anything less is a failure, but I don't.
I get it.
Yeah. So I think if the claim you're making is like, we're overdoing it with the condemnation of relationships that ended, I agree with that. But I don't know. I like the idea that people might find somebody they're really compatible with and find a way to make that work and remain happy with them until the end of their lives. That seems like a very beautiful thing.
And to be clear, I admire very much older Noah's dedication. I mean, that is a special thing, what he's doing. So I do not wish to cast aspersions on that in any way, shape, or form. It's just I feel that the young McAdams and Gosling part of this is a powerful love story all by itself. I didn't need to know that, and then they lasted another 50 years to experience what I think the 1940s part of the movie was trying to give me.
Yeah. No, that is persuasive, and you're sort of partially making a storytelling argument here that it was superfluous. So the movie has some of the standard aging badly stuff that we often see. One thing that this movie had that I found disconcerting was the racial hierarchy of 1940s South Carolina, especially in her family's context, because they're a very wealthy family. I found that very disconcerting.
Yeah, and without commenting on it, and it doesn't have to be in an explicit way. I just mean when it's like just part of the wallpaper of the movie, and it's just and there's no attempt to contextualize it or like make these people seem like fully human characters whatsoever. That's not great.
I mean, there was a line. I don't know if you caught this. There was a line. One of the wonderful things about Lon is that he's from old Southern money.
Yeah, right.
I remember thinking, I don't know if that's landing on your viewing audience in the way that you want it to land on your viewing audience.
Yes.
There's also some gender tropes.
Today.
Not today. Yeah. There's some gender tropes in there, like early on in their first date. The idea is she's prissy and needs him to help her loosen up. Again, this is one of these rom-com things, but that's your problem. You don't do what you want. And then she's like, okay, I'll lie down on the street. Like the idea is like she's repressed and he has to loosen her up. These are minor things. There are ethical issues that I think confront the characters, and I find them interesting. I'll toss one out and see what you think. One is, we've talked about Noah and Martha. Martha is the war widow. They seem to have a very nice relationship, but he's just not ready to give her what she wants. And we don't really know that much about her, but it's not difficult to imagine that she's quite attached to him and a little bit heartbroken by the situation, but can't really leave him. And so I think an interesting ethical question is for Noah. What should he have done? So he's honest with her. He's behaving with integrity. Is it his responsibility to protect her from herself, to say, like, I see that you're in love with me and you're sticking with me even though I'm never going to be able to give you what you want, and you're spending time that you could be spending elsewhere trying to find this somewhere else? Does he have a responsibility to say, I am ending this relationship because it is not good for you?
I think what's complicated is that we would certainly be happy to be like, hey, we don't think it's like morally right for him to do things like cheat on her or even to like break up with her in especially nasty ways. Like there are lots of things that he can do to her that we would, without thinking, say like morally that's not okay. Yeah. Why is like living in this, passively kind of staying with her, just like letting this go on in his depressive way. But like, I don't know, like that seems to me closer to the like breaking up with her like a dick category than just, that one should all be on her. Okay, relationship quotes. We've done a few good ones already, but I'd like to do the great scene when they're on the beach.
Say I'm a bird.
No. Don't do it.
Say I'm a bird.
Stop it. Stop it now.
Say it!
You're a bird.
Now say you're a bird too.
If you're a bird, I'm a bird.
All right. So if you're a bird, I'm a bird. And again, we talk all the time on this podcast about perceived similarity is more important than actual similarity and incorporating the other in the self. And I love the animal transmutation version of this
You're
point.
Right. They are not literally birds. They are just perceiving that they're both
perceiving
birds.
each other as birds. But importantly, an important part of being willing to expand your self-concept is being willing to join your partner in the next life in whatever animal form they wish to take.
Yeah. I found a lot of the writing schmaltzy in this film.
Yep. It's my guy, Nicholas Sparks.
I mean, it is what it is. But I do like it when their kids visit and she doesn't remember them, but they have sort of a nice visit with him, and they said, "Dad, why don't you come home?" She barely even remembers you, and he says, "Your mother is my home." He says more than that, but I like the line, "Your mother is my home."
Yep.
And one of the reasons why I liked it is it reminded me of one of my favorite pieces that I've ever seen in the New York Times. The New York Times asked readers, to submit pet names that they have for each other in their romantic relationships. And one of them is Rome, and it's spelled R-H-O-M-E. So Rosie Onkarts wrote in to the Times, and her husband calls her Rome with an H, R-H-O-M-E. Why? Well, here's the story. My husband started calling me Rome with an H right before we got engaged in May 2020. But I didn't know why. For months, I thought he was calling me Rome without an H, like Rome the city. It was only when he set up our Wi-Fi password in our new apartment that I saw how it was spelled. When I asked him about it, he said it was short for Rosie is my home. So I think one of the reasons why I liked Your Mother Is My Home so much in the film is that I like this story from Rosie Onkarts in the New York Times so much.
That's a good one. I really liked the quote. This is when Allie and her mother are having a big fight.
I love him.
You are 17 years old. You don't know anything about love.
Oh, and you do? You don't look at Daddy the way I look at Noah. You don't touch or laugh. You don't play. You don't know anything about love.
I thought that was just some pretty trenchant observation about the importance of touch and laughing and playing in the context of close relationships, that these things make for good relationships. Allie is experiencing that in her young love, so she may be young, but she's correct. That those are indicators that her mother's relationship is not great.
Yeah, we learn why a little bit later. One of the moments between Allie and Noah that I loved the most did involve laughter. It was he was taking her out on a little paddle boat, and it was beautiful. And then the skies just opened up, and at first she was kind of stressed out. This is unpleasant. Who wants to be stuck out there in a downpour? And then they just thought it was hilarious, and they just laughed together. And that does seem like as good an indicator as any that the relationship is strong.
For sure. So what do we wish we knew? One thing that I found myself, again, I found the love triangle part compelling. And I wish we knew more about people who are in Allie's position and what that's like. Honestly, some of the literature on like mate choice or trying to figure out which partner you should be with, it's this very like, oh, what's your mate value and what can you get? And it's hard for me to imagine a situation that is more distinct from what we see in this movie, which I suspect is accurate, which is it's really painful.
Excruciating.
Right? And she is going through this very challenging experience of having to figure out which direction she's going to go. Now, when the movie lets us in on that, I like it a lot. It ultimately kind of punts because there's this like bait and switch ending. Like you think she's going back to be with Lon, but then she shows up and shrugs, and I love the shrug. It's great. But the scene with Lon earlier is kind of cut short. Like we don't fully see that. But again, this movie's better than the research literature, which really doesn't capture these kinds of experiences organically at all, I would say.
One of the things that I find kind of weird about relationship science is we don't have much knowledge of cross-class relationships. Like it's one of the major tropes in film and in novels and so forth, but the field doesn't know much about it. Now, partly, I think that's because they've gotten rare. Or at least they've gotten
that's interesting.
Rarer. I mean, you could imagine the Mad Men era where, the guy marries his secretary, right? That's somebody who, had some fancy job with somebody who didn't have a fancy job and maybe didn't come from as fancy a background. But increasingly, the doctor is marrying the accountant, the financial analyst is, there's a sort of a cultural elite that are increasingly marrying one another. And so it's rarer and rarer that you're seeing people come from different classes and meet each other and then start dating each other. And I tried to look at the literature to say, like, what does it say about the likelihood of success for same class versus cross-class relationships? And there's just not much there.
That's totally fascinating. The last thing that this brought up for me is this idea of thinking back about the one that got away and how good might it have been if, I had taken that path rather than the path that I actually took. And there's a little bit of experimental work on this that's even like a little bit romantically tinged in some of this work. It's really interesting. You're trying to pick from a dating website, but the faces are blurred. Oh. And so you have to like narrow it down, and you get to the final two, and it's like, okay, which one do you want to date? And then it shows you the one you pick, okay? And then you either see a blurry or an unblurred version of the one you didn't pick. So and then they ask people if they regret their choices, and they regret their final choice more when the other picture remains blurry. Right? So it's the ambiguity of not knowing how this relationship could have turned out if we'd gone past the summer romance is a big thing you regret. And so I wish we had a way to study the, I like that. I like the attraction version of the thing, but I wish we had a way of studying it that was like, like ongoing relationships and the partner you broke up with in September as opposed to trying to continue it.
Totally fascinating.
All right, so we rate movies on this podcast on a scale of 1 to 5 stars. Eli, why don't you go first? How many stars do you give The Notebook?
Well, this movie pulled me in different directions. On one hand, it's syrupy almost to a nauseating degree. On the other, it's a beautiful and romantic and well-acted movie. In the end, I was surprised to discover that my inner romantic won out over my inner cynic. I gave this 4 stars.
Wow! Oh, look at this. 4 stars from Eli. I landed 3. 3 stars from me. Talk about a movie that is carried by some incredible acting between McAdams and Gosling. I mean, again, that's not an original statement, but wow, did they kill it in this.
They did.
I could have lived without some of the other plot lines.
The later stuff.
And other components. But we also rate these movies on Rust Bolts. Now, the Rust Bolt is named after Eli's advisor, the late, great Keil Rust Bolt, pioneer of close relationships research, with 5 stars indicating a near perfect depiction of the nature of close relationships. So I'm 3 Rust Bolts on this one. Seems to get a number of things correct. The way that it depicted how people try to navigate ex-partners and current partners, and certainly, the nature of family sport. Lots of things in there were pretty good. Also some misconceptions around dementia, misconceptions around conflict. Not a big deal. So I landed 3.
I basically landed there for the exact same reason. So 3 Rust Bolts from me. Lots of accurate ideas, some rather inaccurate ideas, the occasional truly loopy idea, but overall solid ideas in here alongside the weird ones. 3 Rust Bolts.
Yeah, I get it. I'm right there with you. So, this has been the Love Factually podcast. I'm Paul Eastwick. I've been here with Eli Finkel. And Eli, I will see you next time.
I'm looking forward to it. The Love Factually podcast is produced and edited by Paul Eastwick and Eli Finkel, featuring music from Andrew Fraker and Sons.